All right, everybody. In the interest of time and us starting to want to get started in a timely fashion, I'd like to introduce who's going to be with us today. We've got myself, Jesse Hurst. We'll do more formal introductions here in just a second. I'm CEO and Certified Financial Planner here at Impel Wealth Management. We have as our esteemed guest today, Dr. Laura Gerak, coming to us from Akron Children's Hospital. And manning the control booth in the Q&A section is Nathan Olish, Certified Financial Planner, Associate Wealth Advisor here at Impel Wealth Management. So welcome everybody. I'm going to go ahead and start the, oh, you know what? I think I have to do it the other way around. Let me go one other way here. I have to share screen first and then start the presentation. So let's do that and go here. And there we go. So, we've got our presentation today. This is a little bit different for us, right? This is most of our clients and people around the area are used to seeing us do presentations around financial topics, retirement planning, investment portfolio management, what happened to the markets during the COVID meltdown and lockdowns and quarantines last year, and so forth. This is something we thought we'd do that actually came from conversations with a lot of our clients and community members over the last year, which is, the idea of navigating, helping families navigate through COVID-19 realities, right? There's a lot of stuff that's happened in the last year. I always say that the word unprecedented has been used an unprecedented number of times in the last 12 months, but there are things that none of us have experienced in our lifetimes, and we want to talk about how that's impacted families, and more importantly, what can we do to help families navigate the bridge to the other side. So we're here to welcome you today to our webinar on how are you doing helping families navigate COVID-19 realities. So as we talk about our objectives for the day, we've got a number of them. The first one is, acknowledging that the COVID-19 realities really have impacted families and communities in new, unique, and different ways than most of us have dealt with before. I know for those of you who've attended past workshops that we've done, we talked about the fact that, in the last 120 years, if you take a look at major disruptors that have happened in the community at any given point in time, a pandemic, social unrest, bitter, divisive election periods, massive economic, dislocations and recessions. There have been a number of times I think there have been 3 other times in the last 120 years that we've experienced 3 of those in a single year. Last year was the first time that we ever experienced all 4 at the same time, and it did have major impacts on the community. Whether it was work from home, remote school, isolation issues, and so forth. We want to acknowledge that. We want to address major issues families are facing, and I'm going to let Dr. Gerak kind of focus there, as that's a specialty of hers. We want to help families be able to have constructive dialogue and conversations around this. We don't want people doing the ostrich thing, sticking their head in the sand, ignoring this, and making things worse by neglect. We want to help people be constructive, talk openly about this, so that we can help people through to the other side. And then the last thing is, we want to point families to tools and resources, to help them get to the other side of this pandemic successfully. So from that standpoint, we have Dr. Laura Gerak with us today. This was the long hair version. So
it looks very different now. I realized when they sent that, I was like, oh my, that's
yeah. So
still do an update.
This was the glamour shot. So
I love
don't worry. There's actually old bio pictures of me where I had hair. So what I'd like to do is let Dr. Laura introduce herself, give a little bit of her background, and then we'll talk about some of her initial thoughts and observations after both of us get a chance to introduce ourselves. So Dr. Laura, why don't you share a little bit with us about your background, what your thoughts and heart and passion are, and why you're here today to join us.
Absolutely. And thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. And the esteemed introduction. I feel better already. Just so thank you for giving me that perk for the day. So I've been with Akron Children's Hospital for 21 years now. My areas of specialty are hematology, oncology, and palliative care. But I'm also the director of clinical psychology at Akron Children's. And I have been there from coming from Toledo, where I received my doctorate, in Yeshiva University in New York City for my master's, and Akron U for my bachelor's. So local, gone away and come back, as so many of us have. Had been on the board of Stewart's Caring Place in the past, so I am very involved with a lot of, obviously not just childhood cancer, but cancer supportive networks in the community. And actually sit on the board for Medical Mutual as their behavioral health consultant as well. So have been here for quite some time, and actually was with Kaiser Permanente before being at Akron Children's. I was their pediatric provider. So I've been back in the area about 26 years and have grown my career here. And not only am I happy to be here today, I'm going to encourage folks, this can be as much of a dialogue. I'm really, I created an overview, and Jesse and I spoke about just sort of an umbrella, but I'm really happy to answer questions. And if there are certain areas that you want to spend more time on or less, I am happy to, first of all, follow your lead. But I also want to second, and Jesse, when you opened with the idea of not burying your head in the sand, and from a financial perspective, I assume, when people don't open mail because it's a bill they don't want to see, or a letter that, means something, this is the same thing, that you're absolutely right, is that when it comes to not just your own mental health, but that of your children and your family's well-being, it is very easy to try to put blinders on and ignore it. And that really only complicates matters further. So to follow your lead, this really is the way of saying, let's just lift our head up, see where we are, where we need to be going. And it is amazing how just with little things you can be supportive of your family in ways you may not even realize. So that's our goal for today.
Perfect. Great introduction and segue. I will give a brief introduction on myself here. And just most of you who are on this know me. We've got a few new people joining us today. So I'll take just a moment and introduce myself. I do want to remind everybody, just as a housekeeping item, that if you scroll your mouse over the screen, either at the top or the bottom, depending on how your screen is set up, you'll see a toolbar that should pop up. And there's a place in there for you to do Q&A. So if you have questions for Dr. Gerak and you want us to get into that, address those questions and so forth, please, we'll kind of hold Q&A to the end, but we'll keep it going and make sure we have plenty of time for interaction, Q&A and so forth. But please click that Q&A box, put your questions in there. Nathan's monitoring those from upstairs here, and we'll be sharing those questions with us here in just a little bit. So for myself, we specialize in providing customized financial solutions. And this is important to us. For those aspiring to make a successful transition from work to a meaningful retirement, right? And it's funny, a lot of times people talk to us about how much they need to accumulate and so forth. And while that's important, right, at the end of the day, money's a means, it's not an end, right? And at the end of the day, whoever has the most doesn't win. Whoever dies with the most doesn't win. So what we really try to do is I use this old term that I coined years ago, like, how do you connect dreams and resources? Everybody has certain financial resources, income resources, asset resources, and how can we connect those in a way that help you derive meaning and value and purpose in life, not only during your work life, but during your retirement. Our specific backgrounds are in the area of investment portfolio management, retirement income planning, and estate planning. And I've been doing this. We stopped counting years. It's just over 30 years. So we decided not to update the slide every year. I'm 55 years old. I started doing this at 22 right out of college. I've done this for 33 years now. And I'm happy to say that for the fourth straight year, our firm has been named just recently, just a couple of weeks ago in February. We have been named as one of the Forbes best in state wealth advisor firms for the fourth straight year. So with that, I'd like to transition over to some just initial thoughts and observations that caused me to reach out to Dr. Gerak. And I'd like to give a big shout out to both Maureen Katanik and Akron Children's Hospital for being willing to partner on this program with us. I've gotten to know Maureen because I serve on the professional advisory committee of Akron Children's Hospital's foundation. And that's an organization that brings together financial advisors, accountants, attorneys who may have clients that are interested in doing charitable giving back to Akron Children's Hospital. But when I reached out to Maureen with some ideas around this, she thought this was a great idea, connected us with Dr. Gerak, and I just want to make sure we get a chance to thank her for this. So from my background and why I started thinking about this, from community and board service standpoint, I serve on the board of United Way of Summit and Medina County. Summit and Medina County recently merged. And, one of the things that we do at Summit and Medina County United Way is we run the 211 Akron info line, the crisis helpline. And if you take a look at 7 areas, and I'll just tick these off quickly, but depression, suicide, domestic violence, drug overdose, food insecurity, rent assistance, utility shutoff. If you take a look at the phone call volume that United Way has gotten from March through the end of the year, and you compare it to the previous year, the phone call volume's up 350%. There has been a massive impact on our community from COVID, from shutdowns, from job loss, from remote learning, from remote work, and so forth. We've also seen a number of organizations. My wife, Rochelle, and I have a donor-advised fund at Akron Community Foundation, and our good buddy, John Paturas, who is the CEO of Akron Community Foundation, is actually my backyard neighbor. And even though we haven't seen him face-to-face in quite some time now, but Akron Community Foundation is doing some great work. They actually help raise funds to help support a number of the nonprofits in the community that were under strain from trying to serve so many people. The other thing that I have noticed from a client standpoint, right, is that I have now, from clients, friends, family members, and so forth, known a number of people who have kids, anywhere from mostly late elementary school to junior high, high school, who after the March COVID shutdowns happened, when they had kids sitting in their rooms 10, 12, 15 hours a day, trying to figure out remote learning, isolated from their friends, and spinning on sometimes negative social media, that they ended up in scenarios where a number of people I know had very good students, National Honor Society, academic challenge. They were involved in student council and volleyball and basketball. And now that a number of these people have kids that are now in counseling and on depression medication, just trying to figure out how to cope through all of this. We also know from a behavioral finance background that studies show that people feel the pain of loss about 2.5 times greater than people feel the joy of gain. So when you think about all the loss that has happened over the last year, whether it's shared experiences, whether it's being with your classmates, being with your friends, travel, any of those things, it's been a very painful experience for people. And there's also something called recency bias, right? Things that have happened more recently weigh more heavily on your psyche than something that happened 3 or 5 years ago. And it's something that we notice is really impacting people from that standpoint. And lastly, we know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. As a matter of fact, even though we have a decent amount of response and people attending this today, When we started planning this 5-6 weeks ago, right? If you think about where we were averaging 260,000 cases a day in the United States. Today, we're down under 70,000 cases a day. So cases have dropped dramatically. Vaccines are coming out, right? The weather's getting better. There's a little more daylight, right? When Dr. Laura and I first had this first conversation, you know, it was dark out at 7:30 in the morning. It was dark out at 4:30 in the afternoon. Cases were sky high. There was talk of additional shutdowns. And now we're starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. And we want to make sure that the people who've gotten this far, we give them the tools to get across the bridge and finish the journey. So with that, I'd like to turn this back over to Dr. Laura and let her share some thoughts and observations before we get into just some more dialogue and question and answer back and forth. So Dr. Laura?
Thank you. And I am going to pick up a couple of your points before I go into the PowerPoint. And that is, when you talk about the neuroscience of pain and joy it is the way our bodies are hardwired. And so I think, you know, regardless of whether we are 21st century human beings or cavemen, is our bodies really are, they're trained to dismiss 90% of the positives, you know, because positives are beautiful and wonderful and experientially great. But our brains still tune into, you know, that less than 10% that could bring us harm, you know, that are alerts, you know, and again, basically, you know, our primitive previous selves, weather changes, you know, the smell of something, the sound of something. And so our brains are still programmed that way. And what you just spoke to now, I think beautifully reflects how quickly we can go back to that very basic way of being and having all our alarms up. And I think, as you've said, beautifully, unfortunately, inaccurately, is our alarms have been up for now going on a solid year from something that we didn't even know we were guarding against, you know, and there were those first waves of, oh, this is going to be something, you know, oh, this is going to be something. And I know even for myself, when they were closing schools at 3 weeks at a time, I remember thinking, oh, 3 weeks seemed a little excessive. Like 2 weeks was enough, you know, to have a viral, and even from the hospital's end, you know, I can speak from that end, is, you know, a cycle, you know, to make sure that people were being safe. Again, yeah, had no idea what we really were coming to. And that idea of, and I'm sure everybody knows some aspect of the stress scales, you know, any kind of stressor in life. So it could be a marriage, it could be a divorce, it could be a loss, it could be the birth of a new baby or a house. You know, when you do those measures of just, they're all still stressors on you. No one could imagine having this many stressors all simultaneously. And so really this year has been unique in that respect. And part of what I want to speak to, you know, for all of us today as adults, but on behalf of children and teens, knowing that this conversation is really always going to have both edges of the same sword, is that this is the first time where we've had to navigate all of it simultaneously. So it is one of the things that I have felt for and have had the greatest respect for all parents, grandparents, family members, because not only are you trying to catch your own breath, and I mean literally sometimes gulping air as the news was coming out, you know, whether it was, you know, medical, whether it was state of the nation, whether it was, you know, suddenly tomorrow my child's school, you know, is on remote, or sports are being eliminated. Everything was happening in real time, so fast, and you as an adult were having to navigate it, and then somehow have a game face, you know, and stay grounded and be together for your kids. So I think that is one of, to me, sometimes the most painful aspects, is the fact that everybody had to respond constantly, dynamically, and do it all together. So there was not time to have a lot of conversation or pre-plan or to, you know, think how you were going to do this. You're responding in real time, as are your kids, saying, you know, I just got this email from school, or we got this text alert, or now this is changing. On the positive end, I would like to think that hopefully has brought families together. And it is one of the times, one of the things that I really have said anytime I've had the opportunity to speak, is to be authentic and to be honest, because I think this is not a time that you could have hidden things, you know, from children and teens, maybe little ones, but even them, not so much. Whether it was, you know, missing things at the holidays, not seeing family members, putting on masks right at the beginning. I mean, when I think back to March, April, May, advice we were giving, how do you not scare kids, but at the same time let them know there's this virus out there, let them know there's this thing called a pandemic. And again, how do you say that in a not scary way, but be honest and be real, because you have to wash your hands, and you're washing your hands and washing your hands till they're dry. So I have also great respect for having seen families learn to do this, children and teens learn to do this. And if anything, I think they sometimes do better than we all do, because they're rule followers by nature, so once they've learned the drill, I know most of the kids I know, they're the first ones to put the mask up and hold their hands out, because they've incorporated it, probably sometimes more than we have. But the idea of having to navigate this, and so part of what, I will say, and, we can talk about later too, is, but that doesn't mean that sometimes you don't need time to catch your breath. And no matter what news was coming, and I agree with you 100% that not only do we see light at the end of the tunnel, but I feel like this is spring, we're coming out of winter, and Ohio, winters, that we're starting to see the signs. People will be cautious, and kids are going to look at you as in like, yeah, are we? Because I sort of wanted to believe that before. I wanted to believe that before we went to the holidays. They've had a lot of false starts when things were going to get better, when we might go back to school, when this might happen, and then things stopped again or turned upside down. And for children, that's really a very confusing message, because then they're looking at you like, are we or aren't we? And that's where your ability to be honest with them is profoundly important, because sometimes the answer is, I don't know. We'll have to see what this week is. We will have to see. And, I mean, I'm sure they know Governor DeWine. They know who's driving some of the messages about work and about school. And hopefully you're having those conversations if your kids are old enough to say, well, we'll see what the governor says this week. He's setting, what's going to work best for us in the state. And then we're following it, and your school's following it. So with all of it, and you'll hear this as my theme, working through today's conversation, is how do you bring honesty, but how do you also ensure confidence in the kids? And it's your confidence, and even sometimes you may not be feeling it, that there are people out there who are laying some groundwork, that are creating resources that we rely on, and then we incorporate that as our family, and as our family, we integrate it individually, because what's best for us is not best for our neighbors or the people across town, but we don't have to generalize. But what do we need to be doing? And really, that's a message. And I think that's a beautiful family message. And so a lot of times, one of the, again, flip side of things, for families that were running in all directions all the time, now you're actually having much more time together. I've heard many, family meals together, game nights together, and hopefully these kinds of conversations too, to say, what do we need to be doing, as well as what do you need to be doing? What do you need from me to feel better, to feel more supported, to feel, whatever that is this whole conversation should be a we thing. How can I help you? How can I support you? What scares you? What has you shaken up? Just that idea of, please bring that to me. What I was trying when I did the original PowerPoint was just an overview, because I suppose some people are just wondering, what has been the state of children and teens mental health through all of this. Again, very different last spring to summer to fall to now, but overall, a lot of it has depended on your child's needs. So we have not seen necessarily a spike in admissions, hospital admissions, suicides, or depression, although, like you said, some people very clearly have needed to get into counseling, have needed medication, because we have taken away their coping. And when you spoke earlier, Jesse, when you said it wasn't just being shut down from school and being remote, but we're in the house, you can't be with your friends, you have plenty of screen time, which isn't always great, and feeds you in a different way. But we've also taken away your sports, your exercise, your ability to be with each other as peers. And we know for kids and teenagers, I mean, for many, not just as their core, this is their heart. And sometimes it's social, sometimes it's athletic, it's exercise. When we stripped them of all of that, we've taken away all of their coping mechanisms, not just as adults. So when we are seeing those changes, a lot of it really is all my usual tools, I don't have now. And then I'm sort of stuck in this box. Again, they've navigated it well overall, but the difference we seem to see, kids who are more introverted, were perfectly fine being at home. Kids who are more anxious, fine being at home, because it got scary, and it was scary going to school, and it was scary having to worry about somebody not having their mask or not watching, or the hallways being too crowded. So for those kids, they sort of tucked in, and if they can do well academically, individually, they were fine. Being remote, if they're self-disciplined, if they can structure themselves, those kids, really did okay, and probably felt supported by that mode of learning. For kids who are very social, who are not very structured, who don't have self-discipline, they really, really struggled. And being remote has been, nothing short of catastrophic for some. What you see in the media is accurate, that for some people they're not learning. For others, it is just a daily struggle to try to learn. And I believe, so this is something, we can talk about at the end, there's going to be a lot to learn when this is all said and done. There will be a lot for us to learn about mental health, but also to see academically what's the effect on our kids, and that's going to be long term. I'm sorry, Jesse, did you have
So
something?
as you think about that, and I know this is before we're not done with a couple of other things, but just as you think about that, right? As just observationally in the Northeast Ohio area, and I would assume that this plays out throughout the state of Ohio, and maybe
Mhm.
it's different state by state. But if you look at some of the more suburban, rural, wealthier school districts, and I can
Mhm.
call some out by name, but I know a number of them in this area have been either fully in person or primarily in person most of the year.
Right.
Most of the urban inner city school districts, Cleveland, Akron, Columbus, Cincinnati, and so forth, have not been. And I know that for the teachers that I've talked with who are teaching remotely, they'll tell me that they spend 20-25% of their day trying to solve IT problems for their kids
Right.
online,
Right.
that 10% of their class hasn't shown up on certain days, and so forth. When
Right.
you think about the academic and the emotional loss that's gone on there, I think you're exactly right that this is something that 3 years, 5 years, 7 years down the road, we're going to be talking about what happened and what's the impact of it.
Right.
Do you have a
Right.
feel for whether the academic or the emotional side is going to weigh more on these kids down the road?
Mm. That's a good question. No, and I actually can honestly say I don't, because as you were asking the question, my first thought was academic, because you can't undo that. These are, and especially depending on how young your children are, these are building blocks, these are foundational. And when you lose a month, a few months, let alone a year of solid, steady education as our system has created it, you're not going to undo that. So my initial response was across the board, we're going to see a bump. And it's interesting because even to hear, there's the push to do some of the spring testing, and people are like, how can you even be asking that? Because we've sort of been off our plan for testing, but there's something to it, because it's almost like we need to see that. We need to start getting some baseline data of what have young people been able to digest. Certainly last spring, I think, like you said, this year has been better. It will not be a surprise. People aren't going to be a year behind, but there's definitely going to be a disrupted year of academic education, except for those who really are very self-disciplined, very motivated, very bright kids who, they were going to get what they were going to get. And maybe they're not as high as they would have been, but they'll be more at the median. But I'd say, middle, to the lower part, most people are definitely going to have a gap in their education. However, having said that, I don't want to say that that's able to be made up, but that's more concretely addressed. And so then when you ask the question, it's like, but emotionally, there's going to be some people who really do, within a year or two, they'll settle back in, they'll talk about it, they'll remember it, but it just is going to fold into a memory. And then there's others who really are like, this is going to be an imprint that's going to be with them, if not long term, forever. So it's hard to say which one more, but both profound.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking at a release here from Governor DeWine's office from February 9th, so about 3 weeks ago. And one of the things that they addressed in this was that how much this has impacted those kind of educational assessment tools, whether it's the grade level tests or whatever, and that the governor has directed that schools and communities come up with a program to help make up for any learning that has been lost or delayed. And they're hoping that they can come up with whether that's extending school years, beginning early, starting, having longer hours, whatever. I know there's at least plans from the governor's office to help with that. I think the one thing that I see from, there's a lot of talk today about diversity, equity, inclusion, and so forth. And it really seems like the people who are that are in the at-risk communities are the ones suffering most, and that this will likely add to a gap that already existed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you said, I think what will have to be looked at, and again, whether it's going to be statewide or if they're going to allow districts to decide themselves, do you create something that's going to be for your district, or do you going to create small subgroups that only the kids who are showing the deficits or showing the weaknesses, vulnerabilities can get the extra time, something over the summer, devoting resources to a specific group as opposed to expecting everybody to. It is going to be one of the
Yeah.
things to be decided.
I want to just kind of transition to talk a little bit about a few topics here, and then once we get through this page, we'll move over to some open Q&A with the people who are online now. I know we've got a few questions in the queue that I can see already. Just as a reminder, if you have a question for Dr. Gerak, please hit the Q&A button and enter your question there, and we'll get you lined up in the queue. But Dr. Gerak, as I think about it, right, you talked about something I hadn't really thought about in a while, which is how quickly this all happened, right? My wife, I'm used to being on an airplane 15, 16, 18 times a year. And my wife and I, 3 times in January, February of 2020, were in and out of town. I was speaking at a conference in Denver. I was visiting clients in Florida. I was attending a continuing education conference at the end of February. And during those 3 trips up, and the last one we flew back into town was on February 27th, every airport, hotel, conference center, restaurant, shopping area was packed, right? Up through February 27th, you literally, if you just observationally look at it, had no clue this was coming. And on March 10th, 12 days later, Governor DeWine came out and said on Friday, March 13th, we're shutting this all down. So, I mean, the speed of this really hit people and took people by surprise.
I think that's the piece, not just of the unimaginable, but that's going to be some of the, and I don't want to use trauma too strongly, but that's going to be the emotional residual, maybe, is because most of us have some warning. Again, even when you think of weather now, we have so much technology. We know when hurricanes are coming. We know when tornadoes are coming. When it's fire season, out west, it is rare that we have something in our life that comes at us and is right on us, and we have very little time to respond. So that in and of itself is going to be something, and especially for young people, this is sort of planting seeds about not just the world being a safe place, but how quickly it can change. For those of us who haven't had much change in our lives, we sort of have this expectation of some sort of realm within we work. This is going to be different for them. I mean, they're going to have this forever as part of their fabric, that life can change on a dime from one week to the next. And again, not necessarily all bad, because it will teach them resilience and teach them, but we were still okay, right? That's what we're going to talk more about later. But certainly it has shaken them in terms of their core and security, and will continue to.
And it's interesting because, like on the technology side, one of the things we keep hearing, in the economy as a whole, but there's definitely impact on families as well, is that technology that probably would have rolled out over the next 2, 3, 5 years all got smashed into the next 6 to 12 months. And
Yes.
so, families that might not have looked at Zoom for a long time, all of a sudden, if that was the only way for grandparents to communicate with their grandkids in multiple states, they had to learn it. So there was, and some of that will actually be good. It will help people
That's right.
to flourish and communicate even post-pandemic.
Exactly. I've heard of Zoom Battleship games, and I was thinking I would never have envisioned Battleship, old school as it is, to be playing, in Florida and Washington all at the same time. And it's wonderful.
There you go. So as we look at some of the topics on this slide, I know you've addressed and talked with me a little bit about the importance of authenticity, and game face, right? You've talked about that a little bit. Like, how do you balance being authentic and genuine in your own feelings and what you're doing as a parent with your children versus having a game face and making sure it's okay for your kids?
So one of the things I was thinking about this morning, well, first of all, I guess I would start with, it is really okay to take time for you. And I think sometimes when media is coming at us, news is coming at us, and we're all sitting in the same room, and the kids are looking at you or starting to ask questions, right away you start responding. And that can be an emotional response or it can be a verbal response, but you start answering before you've even had a chance to catch your breath, take a breath, or formulate what message do I want to give here? And a lot of kids, to be frank, they're hearing a lot of emotional, output. So the other thing that was going on along with COVID was the political scenario. And in some of the surveys we've done, probably really in the last few months, when we're polling and when young people are coming to us with their presenting concerns, it's not so much COVID and isolation, it's the disruption of the world. And what happens is the stressors they were already experiencing, this they're not coming because of COVID or disruption of the world, but it has now made it's just bumped it too high. It was the last thing that they could do. And they're citing just as much, sort of, and not political unrest specifically, but just that sense of tension, that sense of, it's the message of, are we okay? And whether that's COVID, whether it's politics, whether it's as a world, you already had generations that were big into, the environment, big into, weather. And so these are young people who are much more savvy than the rest of us. And so now we've added in, our health, our global health, our safety and security. And that has really rocked young people. So I would say that's the biggest thing. And so for that reason, that's my biggest urging to parents is, I'm never going to say, don't be saccharine. Don't be artificial. Don't put a smile and it's fine. The things kids most are frustrated by is if they feel dismissed. If they get it, it's fine. You don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about that here. It'll be okay. They feel, first of all, disrespected, because they are incredibly wise and they're seeing this, and they're hearing it from their friends. And so you are the most important person. If they come to you to say, are we okay? They need to look at you in the eyes and have you be able to say, we are okay. We'll figure it out. Like the message can be, we'll figure it out. Not that we're standing right here now and, things aren't happening. We'll figure it out. And this morning I was actually thinking the analogy for anybody who's into sports is the one thing is the ball's always coming. You don't know where it's coming from, right? But when somebody pitches, you don't know what's coming. You just know the ball's coming. And if you're out on the soccer field, and when I think of a lot of kids out on the field, well, that there's a game plan, right? But either the quarterback sometimes has to, be a little more creative and dynamic. And if you're on the team, you better be watching, you're watching what's happening and then you respond, right? And we work as a team. If you're on the soccer field, same thing. There's very few, if you're on the tennis, there's very few ways that I was thinking, maybe golf, that it doesn't apply, that you actually do know something's coming. You just don't know where, how, and when. And maybe that's how we've shifted. And even if you had that kind of conversation of, well, where's the ball coming from? We don't know, but I know maybe you need more practice hitting your curveballs, but you hit this one, beautifully, or you always are paying attention to, when the pass is coming. And so that's how we sort of just opened up our ability to have a broader set of skills for coping and being responsive. And so I would tell parents, take a breath, go grab a cup of coffee, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do to say, I'm going to grab some water. And I say this, stall with the kids, and say, I'm going to go get something and then let's sit down and talk about it. Do you guys want anything? I'm going to grab something from the kitchen. Truly is a way just to catch your breath, wrap your head quickly around your emotional response to what do my kids need to hear from me right now? Because they probably don't need to hear my fear, my anger, my frustration, my what ifs. They looked at me and said, are we okay? Whatever the question was, underneath it is, are we okay? And then come back and say, what are your concerns? Let's talk about how we're going to navigate it.
I like the sports analogy. And if you had seen me play golf, you would know there's a fair amount of uncertainty in my golf game. So
okay. I'm trying to think of all the sports. Is there anything that doesn't apply to?
Yeah. Well, I was on the golf team in high school, and my golf coach wouldn't let me carry a driver in my bag because I could hit a 3-wood straight. He said there was way too much uncertainty if I carried a driver. So
then there it is. Exactly. Use the analogies you've got. Use what your children know. If it's video games, right? The first thing they do on a video game is they look and see, right, when they land on a planet, they see what resources they have. They know what resources they're going to build. This is their technology. So learn their language and then make the analogy. Sorry about that.
As kids look at you and ask the question, I know it's number 4 on this, but will things be normal again? Will I go back to school? Will I be able to play sports? Will I be able to be with my friends? How are you, what kind of questions are you hearing from kids, and what are they most concerned about, and how are you helping people address those?
Yes. I think I think it's safe where we are now to say yes. I don't know about the word normal. Normal's tricky. And I think I would say that to them. Normal's a tricky word. What's normal? If you look at your class of friends, and you looked at everybody, which one of those people is normal by looks, by, comments, by like, well, what does define normal? I think everybody's got their own normal. Our family has our normal in certain things, you and your friends have some. So I would maybe pull back from the normal world, but I would say things are going to come back again. I don't know. It's going to take time. My message would be it's going to take time and it'll be a process. I don't know if kids know the word process as much. It's going to take time, and I don't know what it's going to look like. We're going to take it one step at a time, just like we did when everything closed down last spring. And then slowly we sort of took steps back. That's what's going to happen with this. I do think it's going to come back to we'll be at concerts and we will be at sporting events and we will be back with our teams. But it will be a while till we can be sure. To me, it always is okay to say we have to be sure everybody's safe. And I bet there's a lot of people who are going to be nervous, and I would put that out there because first of all, you open the door for them because that might be a follow-up. Do you think you'll be nervous, when you start being around people again? And they may be like, no, I can't wait. But it's like, but other people may be nervous, so we'll have to be respectful of those who do. So it might go slower than you want to like, let's go people it'll be a process. But we'll get there again. Then I would open up for the kids. And I would be really honest about this, but I wonder what it'll be like for you, because it's different for me as an adult who's had 50 years, of normalcy before this happened, 40 years, 30 years, 20 years. When you're a teenager, I wonder what you're going to carry with you or as a kid. And then I would use it as an opportunity to build in something in terms of resilience and competence. And so what I want to let you know is these are the things I've seen out of you that have blown me away, that I sort of knew you had, but I didn't know until I saw you using them. The way I saw some leadership, in your neighborhood, amongst your peer group, or even with the family, when so-and-so was upset and you did this or that, with your brother or sister, or, even when I was having to change things at work and you knew there were days where I just thought, oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. And you'd be sort of like, you know what, Dad, I'm going to handle this today. Or Mom, how about if I do this? I cannot tell you that might have been a little thing to you, but it really like rose up this high in terms of how you pay attention and how respectful and supportive you were. So I think those things will be different, and that's not a bad thing. Like I think you're going to take all those forward, and that's really cool.
So it's interesting when you talk about what normal is going to look like after the 0708 financial crisis.
Mm.
AIG and Lehman Brothers failed and stuff. And we were coming out of that. There were two money managers, economists out of PIMCO named Mohammed El-Arian and Bill Gross, who coined the phrase at that time, it will be the new normal, right?
Yeah.
You hear that all the time. Very few people know where that came from. But like for us, we think about, well, there will be a new normal. Kids might think about that way differently.
Yes. And that's excellent. In our hospital world, where kids have medical diagnoses and they're either diagnosed with something, they've had an accident, car accident, and there's some reason that's brought them to the hospital, and they've had some work to do. Even if they go back to full status, is there's not anyone who wouldn't say it's a new normal. Life is never the same. You can't go back to what was. And sometimes you have to allow room for there to be some grief and mourning over the loss of that, the innocence of it. And for your kids too, is when you're hearing them, I miss the days. I wish it was. I think it's sweet to support them and saying, I do too, and when we start to move forward, that will be part of the conversations. What are the things that we let go of that we really can stay let go of? We don't really need to take back on. What are the things we let go of that we miss terribly and we can't wait to get back to? And then what's that in between? So that way you're starting to recreate the fabric based on them and their personalities, and within your family, just in terms of like integrating what's right for you all.
I know on this last point that we have here on this slide, which was about helping families build resiliency, I've heard you mention that a number of times. And I heard you talking just a couple minutes ago about affirming that in kids, what you saw them do that was amazing and so forth. How much of that is kind of innate who the kid is and what their own level of resiliency is, and how much of that can be built or built up in kids through affirmation?
It's both. I think, like you said, by nature, some people, all people, are just more resilient, and when I work with young people at the hospital, two of them can have the exact same medical trajectory course, and one comes out a rock star, rocks through it, and then turns around and is like, oh yeah, that little thing I had to do, and they just keep going. That's who they were. That was not, we didn't do anything differently. They didn't. And there's others who just collapse into it, and who are forever affected by it, sort of almost wear it as a blanket, or, can't get beyond it. And that starts by nature. But, and this is where I think it's really important and positive, hopefully, is where important people in the family. So starting with parents, but they can be grandparents, they can be aunts, uncles, mentors. You have such an important voice in helping either of those. So if you are somebody who can, not negatively intentionally, but feed into that message that we're vulnerable, this is scary, I don't know if you'll be okay, you shouldn't be doing that, you're really feeding them those very messages. And if you're somebody who's like, well, you'll handle this, you'll do fine. Well, you did fine before, there's no reason you're not gonna be back out on the bike, you had to heal up before I was gonna let you be back on it. But, now that you're healed, and what did the doctor say? Go for it. Go for it. So our message, our tone, what we do as adults, how we feed children those messages, has a lot to do then with the building resilience. And the one thing that this is really huge, and this is for all of us as an adults generationally, is, we tend to be generationally those who want to either do for our kids or protect them from or run interference for. And again, that's not any one person, that's all of us. But the message always is, and nobody ever intends this, is I have to do it because I don't trust that you will. It's a message of competence. So when somebody else steps in and does it for you, there's this implicit message that I have to do this for you because I'm not sure that you're ready. I'm not sure that you will. Like, there's this competence message. So the more you're saying, you've got this. I'm sorry.
Could it even be in that scenario that it's not that I don't trust you, but it's that I want to do this because I don't want you to get hurt. I want to protect you, right?
Exactly.
Or maybe you're not strong enough, right?
Exactly. And it's never said. And a parent never says that. That's certainly not their intention. And usually the kids aren't thinking that. It's all this very unconscious process. But the message is, well, I better let you handle it. And so there's this sort of almost mutual thing that happens is, well, the world's a scary place, or it's not going to be okay, or I don't trust my instincts, or you don't trust my instincts. Where when you're saying, I think you've got this, you may be, just absolutely shaking aside as a parent, or as an adult, but the message can be, what do you think you need to do this successfully? I think you've got this. What do you need from me? What are the tools? Like, literally, is then what you're doing is you're feeding, they're hearing the message, you've got this, and they're being like, no, I don't, no, I don't. It's like, well, what would I be doing if I was there? What's different? Well, you could do that, right? Well, we could do this. And you're always handing off, but there's just this beautiful message of, you've got it. And and if it doesn't go exactly as we planned, then we'll regroup, just like on sports, right? We'll regroup, and the next play is going to be a little different. Is then we learn from it, right? And so that builds resilience and competence.
Yep. So let me ask you one last thing, and then I know we've got some questions in the queue that I want to get to here in just a moment. And it's this middle question here that we kind of skipped over about warnings.
Oh, warning signs.
Are there specific things that you think parents and families need to be watching with their, adolescent kids, their younger kids, and even with each other in families that really need to be aware of?
Yes, I appreciate that. And thank you for that reminder. So the biggest thing I expect is all kids go through the emotional spectrum all the time, day in and day out, week in and week out. So when you see things, unless it's something like literally a child saying they're going to hurt themselves, or I don't think I can live, or I don't think I can make it, those words always warrant a response. But anything other than that, they're going through their own pathway. And so I'd say don't over respond to it. But as all good family members and parents, just be watching. You should just be observing. You should be noticing. And when I say to be responsive, or the warning signs, is when you start to see a pattern and kids get stuck. So before, you'd always see them go through a day or two. They always have their off day or a couple days where they're in a funk or this, or they seem more anxious or they're more tearful. Your kids. And when you see that, I wouldn't be alarmed by that. I would note it. But when, man, it's been more days this week, or they're not coming back out of it, or the things that would have made them laugh, or going to do something with a friend, even virtually, and they're bowing out of that, when they're backing away from things, and you're like, now this has been like, this is not just a day or two. For teenagers, I always say, like, if it's been a week, by 2 weeks, it's like, oh, now they might really be stuck. But for littler kids, you're looking for a shorter window. And then really this first step is just to do the check-in. And the check-in always is, hey, I've noticed, hey, can we talk for a minute? Because I observed this week and I want to see, what do you think? What do you have to say about it? And is there anything I can do? Because usually if you're too direct in asking, hey, what about this? Like maybe a homework drop off, they didn't get their homework done, they're not turning some assignments in, however it is, they're afraid of being in trouble. So the first thing they're doing is like, no, 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 it's like, no, 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 that's not what I'm asking. I'm just checking in. Is you're always on your homework. And man, the last few days, I noticed you missed a few. Can I check in on how you're doing? So they're hearing that part. And then hopefully that opens up the next step of, is something up? Is something changing?
Is social media playing, and I promise this will be the last question, and then Nathan, we're going to jump right over to you. Are you seeing kids getting caught in social media rabbit holes that they can't get out of, or getting pulled into things that maybe they wouldn't have had they been more busy with normal life?
Sometimes yes, and I'd say that in terms of escapism or just the rabbit hole that can be anything you swipe to, and the next thing you know, it's traveling you down here. So from that end, yes, because they don't have all their usual sort of repertoire of things to pick from. But the one thing that's been better, and we've heard across the board, is bullying has been better. A lot of the cyberbullying, a lot of things that what go on in school, that's the one thing that we have had kids consistently say, they're not as bullied as they used to be. So maybe the world is being kinder, or that the social media piece of like being nasty to each other is less. But media itself, sometimes the social media piece of dragging you in. And so then it is okay. I know they're on screens a lot to say, let's just take a break from it. And especially if the weather's getting nicer, we plan something to go do for a bit. I know you have questions. I can't see them. I tried to look once and I couldn't see them.
Nathan's got them here.
Nathan's in.
And Nathan, and again, for anybody who's out there that wants to add in a question, we've got about 10 minutes or so left to finish Q&A, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. But Nathan, you want to go ahead and let us know what you've got in the queue?
Yeah, so I'll start with, there's a couple of them, but I'll go with one of them. It says, what advice would you have for teachers helping kids transition back into the classroom? We've had friends talk about how difficult it is for kids getting back into the swing of full-time in-person learning.
Yes, that is going to be big. And I always like to start with asking the kids, what's going to be the hardest part for you? So even for a teacher to have their first day or two, in fact, maybe every morning, the first week of school, to say, what's going to be the hardest part of today? This is a big change again, right? It was a big change when we all went out last year. Now it's a big change that we're all back. We're going to, spend 5 minutes every morning checking in on what's the hardest part about having to get out of your PJs and get dressed and be here today, whatever it is. But just opening that dialogue so the kids get to put voice to whatever their, worries. This is hard. This makes me nervous. Usually with kids, once they've spoken it, then they go on their way, so it's been heard, they go on their way. So it's good for them. And it's great for the adults because now, you're not trying to talk to something that you don't know, am I missing it or hitting, what their needs are. They can tell you.
Okay. Nathan?
Great. Yeah. How do we help people move forward even after they've had their vaccines? People are still going to be afraid even after the vaccine.
Yeah.
How do we help them move forward?
How they are. And I think it's a wise question in recognizing that in some ways people are going to want the world to go back. We have our vaccines, we're safe now. And yet we know that it's not. And it's not that simple. So that's probably the best way to say is I know it's not that simple, but it's safer now. There's a level of protection that wasn't there before. We now have, and I've also been speaking to people, and I think it's medically safe to say that we also understand the disease better. We understand the virus better. And even now that it's throwing us curveballs, and it is, we are more ahead of knowing which direction it's coming from and being able to respond differently. So when people are getting sick, last March, April, May, we were throwing everything at the kitchen sink, and we may have been throwing things that we didn't even, need to be. Heaven only knows. Now we have a more targeted strike. We know how to respond to it. So that's what I'd be saying is that there really is a great level of protection now with the vaccines. And if people do get sick, we know more of what to do with it to minimize its impact. And so that's what you have to do. But otherwise, I would really respect if people are still nervous, do not push, because there might be some who are like, enough already, or those who are impatient, like, let's get back to normal. Is you have to be respectful. This has been too long and too embedded to expect people to go back. It would be really reckless and probably harmful to some people to be pushed too quickly if they're just like, and if your kid's saying, I'm scared or I'm not ready, it doesn't mean they can't go to school. Because this, for kids who have social anxiety and school anxiety before, we've now sealed it in by letting them stay home and been in their protected bubble. So as an adult, you're going to have to really be saying it is safe there. It is safe. It is safe.
Well, and it's interesting because just like the population as a whole even within our client base, Nathan and I see on a regular basis clients all over the spectrum with their, how they've lived life during the last 10 months, from people who haven't been in a store, restaurant, whatever. They get
Right.
curbside delivery of their groceries and then take them home and wipe them down with, Clorox wipes, whatever, to people
Right.
who have gone out to restaurants, they've traveled, they've been on planes and so forth. And so people are all over the place with this. And we've just tried to be very respectful of where people are in
Right.
their thought process, and kind
Absolutely.
of just look at the science with it and look at how things have evolved. So
Right.
anything else in the queue at this point, Nathan?
I got one more, but I just because I know we got only a couple minutes. So, how do you help a kid who might not want help but needs it?
Oh, that's a great question. Towards the end, right? That you continue to keep coming alongside them, that even if they say no, 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 is you continue to come alongside and be present with them then, because sometimes the first step is just coming alongside. You can't make anyone do anything. And even as a psychologist, therapist, the first thing I ask a teenager if they come into my office is, do you want to be here or is somebody making you be here? Because it's like, that's the reality. And as parents, sometimes that's what you do. And then I will usually say to them, please bear with me for 2 sessions. The first session, this isn't going to even count because, I'm going to ask questions. I'm trying to get to know you. Come twice because you can't reject something until you've really tried it. So once I've met you twice, then you have something to base it on. And then if you really don't want to come back, I am not, unless somebody was severely, in distress, and really, sort of like even medically, if you had 104-degree fever, I'm not going to let that go. If you're riding at 99, I'm going to have some wiggle room. So that kind of idea of being respectful, coming alongside and saying, what I need is to give you a shot. Sometimes as adults, you can also say, but I think I need the help and I'd like you to come with me because I can report my observations, but they may or may not be right. And I want that person to hear from you. And then, even if you come to the first session or two and I end up going, because maybe they can give me advice or education or direction, a lot of times that's a way to get young people in. And then I really would say, if you're working with a child or adolescent therapist, they're very good about, knowing how to hook the kids or pacing them, or if they really feel like somebody absolutely doesn't want to, they will guide you through saying, don't keep forcing them to come in, because we want it to always be an open resource. We don't want to shut a door where it's like, oh, they dragged me to, therapy for all this time. It's like, we're not helping anybody then. So hopefully that answers a bit of it.
Kids get a lot more than adults give them credit for, don't they?
Oh,
Like they are way more aware. They see
so
more
much.
things. They kind of
So
have
much.
built-in BS detectors. They know it, like they get it, right?
So much so. So much so. It is. Yes. Yes.
Good. Anything else in the queue right now, Nathan?
No, that's all we have right now. Yeah.
Okay, and I know we're right at 1 o'clock.
I tried to be
right on 1
succinct.
o'clock.
I want to
And,
cut people short.
it's been interesting. I know we're getting close, right? I know the case numbers are coming down, hopefully, between vaccines rolling out. And I've heard a lot, from economists and people from Johns Hopkins and different people about when we hit herd immunity. It sounds like at the pace the vaccines are rolling out, we should be adding about 10% of the US population per month to the number of people. And based on people who've had it and people who've been vaccinated, it seems like we might be getting close to 40-50% of the population now. Hopefully within 3-4 months, we get to the place where between that and the weather and being outdoors, life looks different than it did 3 months ago or 6 months ago. But any other last words from you as far as
I just added one. It's a
closing
resource.
thoughts that you'd like to add?
Yes, I just realized because we talked about resources. So there is a website called the NCTSN. I just put it up in the chat because I realized we may or may not have it. It's the National Childhood Traumatic Stress Center. They have so they are available for any childhood stress disorder, and they have fabulous tip sheets. Parent tip sheets, and they have them after disasters, hurricanes, weather related things, but they've got great stuff on COVID response now. They have some tip sheets, they have videos, it's a great resource place where as a family member, if you're wondering, like you said, going forward and you want to say, how do I talk to my child? And they're this age, how do I talk to my child about this? The NCTSN national website is a great resource that is, well embedded, and it's not something you're gonna have to worry about sharing information inappropriately, and developmentally, all child and teen friendly.
Good. And you said You could just Google that, N as in Nancy, CTSN.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Great. And I will tell you just in closing, right? We always ask this question, right? When this is all over, what would I look back and wish I'd done? And that's why we try to bring these webinars to people, bring some information, let people think about it in advance so that they can be prepared. They can help themselves and their families as much as possible. But I will close with one last story. My good friend, Trevor, this is just a sheet on how we can help you. Reach out to us if we can. But my good friend Trevor, who's in Scottsdale, Arizona, he's a certified financial planner, runs a great financial planning firm out there. He's got 4 daughters between the ages of 7 and 16. And I was talking with him a few weeks back, and he said, you know what, I'm going to miss COVID. And I said, really? Why? And he said, my daughters who are involved in dance, gymnastics, and soccer, he goes, we've had dinner together as a family 5 nights a week for the last year. And he goes, that hasn't happened in 10 years or 12
Potentially.
years, right? So there have been some good things, but we do want to help people as much as possible. With that, I know we are right at time, and I would like to say once again, thank you to Maureen Katanik. Thank you to Akron Children's Hospital, and especially thank you, Dr. Laura Gerak, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun sitting and talking with you. We have recorded this, and it will be posted to our website. And we'll probably, I think Maureen asked me if we could share it with you guys as well, so you guys can use it as a resource if you would like. But thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time.
No, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for the invite, as well as everybody who was there today. You're asking all the right questions. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks.